Hey everybody, it's Luca from Rackets and Runners. So today we're finally going to do the 100 square inch racket tier list. I know that 98 square inch tier list came out like 2 months ago, but I've been really busy reviewing other rackets, doing some other stuff as well. So finally getting to it. I also kind of wanted to wait so I could talk about the new Ultra 100 because that obviously just came out. But yeah, I also quickly want to go over what a tier list is because I get that question every time. It's kind of a ranking system. As you can see here, we've got, different tiers, different levels. You see S, A, B, C, D. Those are pretty standard for a tier list. S stands for superior, and then A, B, C, D is kind of like grades in school. And then, like I included in the 98 square inch tier list, I've included a GOAT tier because I wanted to make a tier that I guess rewards rackets for being particularly outstanding more than S tier. Like there's going to be a few rackets in here that are going to be an S tier, but there's some rackets that I truly believe are some of the best rackets of all time. There was already the Aero 98 and the 98 square inch tier list, and in this one, I think there's going to be one. Don't actually know if I'm going to have the bravery to put it in there, but yeah, GOAT tier is for rackets that deserve, a particularly high level of recognition, I guess. Oh yeah, and I know this is supposed to be a 100 square inch racket tier list, but there are 299s on this list because I didn't want to include them in the 98s because that one would have been too long and this one would have been too short. Well, I mean, not too short. This is probably going to be another 40-minute video. So yeah, we're not going to waste any more time. We're going to get into it. But before that, let me just remind you, as usual, that any of the rackets we talk about here today, you can check out on our website, racketsandrunners.ca. Also, please remember to like the video, subscribe to the channel, follow me in the store on Instagram, and let me know in the comment section what you want me to cover next. Let's cut to the tier list. All right, so we're starting off with a racket that did come out in 2025, so this is a new entry to the list. It's the Gravity MP, and for those of you who don't know, I'm a big fan of the Gravity line, but not so much the Gravity MP. And the big reason for that is I think this racket is quite launchy, a little bit too launchy for the fact that it's sort of labeled a control racket. I think the 16 by 20 string pattern combined with the 22mm beam and the fairly soft flex, it just creates a slightly ambiguous feeling sweet spot. It does have a pretty high launch angle, so if you're not using a lot of spin with this racket, you're not gonna feel, that ultimate sensation of control that you do get with some of the other rackets in this line. And the problem with that is it's not really a spin racket, so spin isn't super easy to access. It's got, pretty clunky head size and shape. So it's kind of caught in between two worlds, I want to say, where you do need to play a little bit of a faster, modern, spinny game to control it, but then it's not a very fast, modern, spinny racket. So I'm going to put the Gravity MP in the B tier. It's not a bad racket by any stretch of the imagination. It's obviously extremely comfortable, and it is quite forgiving if you do have a slightly slower stroke, like the sweet spot is really big. I do think if you're a really advanced player, you're probably going to want to play with something a little bit different, and there are other rackets in the Gravity line that are much better, I think, for an advanced player's swing. Now, we're going to move on to the Pro Staff X, which, to be honest, is probably my least favorite racket on this list. I don't fully understand what Wilson was trying to accomplish with the Pro Staff X. Pro Staffs have historically been kind of the smallest head size rackets in the world. Like, the 90 was super popular during a time where 95s and 97s and 98s were becoming much more mainstream. And then when they did release the Pro Staff RF97 or the Pro Staff 97, that was still smaller than 98s and 100s, and part of the reason it's so smaller head size is because that makes it a little bit more like a scalpel. It becomes a well-rounded racket, it's a little bit more reactive and responsive at the net, and it has a ton of precision. And I feel like making it a 100 just kind of takes away from the charm of the Pro Staff. This racket is pretty clunky, it doesn't move particularly quickly through the air. The sweet spot is small for a 100, but not like uber precise the way I would want a Pro Staff to feel. So I think it's just kind of caught in between two worlds again, kind of like the Gravity MP, but the reason I have it so low is because it's weirdly difficult to use. Like this racket has a really high swing weight, and the fact that it is a 100 makes it super slow and sluggish, so like difficult to bring quickly through contact. I don't play with it all that often, to be fair, because I really didn't like it when I tested it. So, maybe I should try it again, but this would be an easy D tier choice for me. Okay, we're gonna move on to the FX500. Oh, we're not starting with my favorite rackets here. Yeah, the FX500 is definitely not a bad stick, and I think the big thing with the FX500 is that it is quite a bit more comfortable than rackets like the Pure Drive, which is a direct competitor to. So that's obviously a pretty big redeeming quality because stiff, powerful rackets like this do tend to be uncomfortable, or at least less comfortable than average. So, you know, it allows players who need comfort to play with this style of racket. But when I compare it to the Pure Drive, it's like a 7 out of 10 in everything that the Pure Drive is a 10 out of 10 in. Or like, you know, if the Pure Drive is the gold standard, this is like 70% of the Pure Drive, other than the comfort, of course. So I just struggle to recommend it over the Pure Drive in any way. Like, very few categories of rackets have such a high performing, you know, like standout racket that the other ones are so difficult to recommend. But unfortunately, the power rackets category does have the Pure Drive, which everything needs to be compared to. So I want to slot it in the C tier. Yeah, I just don't have a ton of good things to say about the FX 500, but I know a lot of people do like it. So if that's you, that's totally fine. It's still gonna be a powerful, user-friendly racket. Okay, the Boom MP. So for me, this is kind of like a more extreme take on the Gravity MP, but at least this racket has more of an identity than the Gravity MP. Like, the Gravity MP is part of a control line, but really isn't a control racket. The Boom MP is really designed to be super forgiving, super user-friendly, made almost to be kind of a hybrid game improvement racket, but also a racket you can use at a fairly high level. So it does have more of an identity than the Gravity MP, but everything that the Gravity MP suffers from, the Boom MP suffers from just a little bit more. It's very launchy, it's quite difficult to control if you do have a faster stroke, and the power is good. Obviously, it is a fairly powerful racket, but it's more of the easy depth type of power. Like, you can generate a lot of easy depth with this racket. When you do try to really rip at the ball, for one, the racket feels kind of sluggish and it just has a weird swing through the air because of the design. And then it also doesn't really have that super solid, you know, like energy transfer into the ball that some really good power rackets do. So it's not the type of racket that generates a lot of top end power. So I think for the right person, you know, for a player looking to improve, maybe like a 3.5 or a 3.0, looking to improve, who wants a racket they can still use once they get to that 4.0, maybe even that 4.5 level, it's pretty good, but it is still limited in its top end potential. So I'm gonna put it in the C tier. I'd consider putting it in the B tier because there aren't a ton of rackets that play like the Boom MP. Like, it's obviously been compared to the Clash, but it's really nothing like the Clash. It's much more traditional in its feel on contact. But sometimes like, if you make something unique that also isn't very good, like, there's no real point in making it unique. So it's kind of a little bit like that with the Boom MP. Okay, now we're gonna move on to the Ultra 100, which I'm very excited to talk about. Obviously, this is the most recent racket review that I did on the channel. And before this tier list, I had no idea where I was gonna put it, because if we were gonna make a personal preference tier list, like, it would probably be C, maybe B tier, because I don't particularly enjoy hitting with a racket like this. But I think that the updates Wilson have made to it have kind of separated it from its competition. I'm not saying it's like a better racket than the Pure Drive or a better racket than the Ezone, but it's a very different racket to the Pure Drive and the Ezone, because the major change they made was making it feel significantly more comfortable than it was previously. They added, you know, a bunch of Wilson technology in there to kind of make the sweet spot bigger, but also the racket a little bit mushier. But doing that to the Ultra, making it more comfortable while maintaining that stiff flex, kind of makes it a great option for those players who like that stiffer, more responsive, powerful feel from their racket, but then can't use something like the Pure Drive 100 because it is too uncomfortable. So I'm actually a really big fan of the change they made here, and they also made it like pretty significantly more spin friendly than the previous one. So yeah, I just think a really, really good update. For those of you who need that forgiving feel, maybe you're like a 3.5 or a 4.0, but you also want a racket that definitely can be played at a high level, the Ultra 100 is great. Now, you guys won't hear me talk about the Ultra 100 all that much going forward, just because it's not a racket for me, but this is kind of me trying to be objective and saying, it's good at what it does, even if it isn't for me. So yeah, now we can move on to the Speed MP and the Legend MP. I just got them side by side here because they're essentially the same racket. And yeah, the Speed MP just continues to dominate despite being one of the ugliest rackets that I've ever seen. The Legend MP is gorgeous, so buy that one. But yeah, I mean, it is a really, really, really good racket. I didn't think I would ever get so excited about a racket being well-rounded, but it's so good at so many things that it does excite me to play with this thing. Like, when I go out and hit it, the first thing I'm impressed by is its control. Like, it has a really predictable feel to it. It's really, really stable. And then as I play it more and more, I get more comfortable with it. I start spinning the ball really well, like it responds really well on spin shots. And then the power doesn't necessarily stick out to me while I'm playing, but it's when I switch to something else that is like noticeably less powerful, like a 98 or 97 square inch control racket, that I realize the Speed MP packs a huge punch. And yeah, I mean, this was kind of the first jack of all tradesy 100 to be developed by a company, and it's done so well that pretty much everyone else is trying to copy them now. Like that's why we see the Blade 100, the Percept 100. All these brands are starting to make their own version of the Speed. Basically, this Speed MP is definitely a little bit more muted than it has been in the past. Not the biggest fan of that, but I do have to say it has helped to make it a little bit more solid and make the sweet spot a little bit more forgiving. So to me, the Speed MP is an easy S tier racket. The one little criticism I'd have for this racket right now is that it is actually a little bit sluggish through the air. The Speed MP used to be a 22 millimeter beam racket. This one's a 23 now, and you can definitely feel that extra millimeter just slows it down a little bit. Part of me wishes they would go back to 22, but then also the 23 millimeter beam is more powerful and more forgiving, which I think probably makes it more popular. And I'm really splitting hairs here. Like it's definitely not a slow racket, but I do wish it was a little bit quicker. So if they could get it to that point, that'd be perfect. Maybe on the next one, who knows? But yeah, really, really, really good racket. All right, the Shift 99. Now, interesting that this comes after the Speed because I actually think the Shift is similar in a lot of ways to the Speed MP where it's extremely well-rounded, but the Shift definitely is a little bit more spin focused than the Speed. The big thing about the Shift 99 is they included that vertical bending technology where basically the racket pockets the ball a little bit deeper when you hit with spin. So the ball just like sinks into the string bed and then pops out with a little bit more spin, kind of like what spin grommets do or like a really open string bed does. But this technology does that without making the racket inconsistent or launchy the way some of those other spin techs do. Now, I do think when you're playing with the Shift 99, you do want to play with more spin than not. Like you don't want to be hitting flat shots the whole time with this thing. But when you do decide to flatten out and go for something, you know, a little bit bigger, a little bit lower percentage, it's not going to fly on you the way it would on, there you go, the Extreme MP, for example. The other thing with this racket is that it's not a 100, so it actually is a little bit quicker and more, it kind of has that more snappy maneuverability to it that 98s and 97s do. But yeah, really, really good racket. I think it's just kind of flown under the radar since it first came out. I don't really know why. I mean, I think it's kind of an ugly paint job. And the fact that no pros have even like faked endorsing it, I don't think that helps Wilson all that much. But I think this is a really good racket. I'm not gonna put it in the S tier. I don't think it's quite as special of a racket as the Speed MP. But I am going to put it in the A tier, and it's a comfortable A tier racket. All right, the Extreme MP. Now, I go back and forth with the Extreme MP, or I don't really go back and forth with the Extreme MP. I don't think this racket is like particularly impressive for modern tennis anymore. I think spin rackets have just evolved to a point where they're spin focused, but they're not so spin focused that they can't do anything else. And the Extreme MP is kind of an example. It's still an example of a spin racket that can't do much else just because it does have a pretty open string bed. It's got a lot of that spin tech. It has a really kind of powerful, launchy feel to it. So if you're not using spin, you're just not going to get a lot out of this racket. And that's okay, but the competition's so high in this category that I can't really put it any higher than B tier. And I almost want to put it in C tier. The only reason I'm going to put it into B tier is because there are still some players who play such a grindy, spinny, baseliney style of play that want this type of racket. The Extreme MP kind of fills that niche now, but just not quite well-rounded enough in 2025 where, you know, rackets are kind of coloring the lines between different styles nowadays. So yeah, I think B tier is kind, and the reason I've got it in B tier is because it fills that niche. So yeah. Okay, now the Vcore 100 suffers from similar things that the Extreme MP suffers from. Like, I don't think this is a particularly consistent spin racket. The difference between the Vcore 100 and the Extreme MP is that the Vcore 100 has that modern design with a lot of mass in the upper hoop. And what that does is it makes it quite a bit more stable, so just a little bit more solid on contact, and also a lot more powerful. You know, when you really want to go for it, get a hold of the ball, it can rip it quite a bit harder than the Extreme MP and just feels more solid doing that. So that better stability and that higher power just makes it a little bit, gives it a little bit more variety, makes it a little bit more well-rounded. You still don't want to play a flat style with the Vcore 100. Definitely go with the Vcore 98 if you want a super well-rounded racket that can play flat, but it is just a little bit better than the Extreme MP, which, you know, would make me want to put it in a tier higher, but I just don't think this is an A tier racket. So I'm gonna put it in the B tier with a reminder that the reason I have the Extreme MP so high is because it fills that niche, which I think I've said 3 times now. So different styles of spin rackets, both important, but you know, the Vcore 100 is just a little bit better overall. Okay, now the Origin is a super unique racket. I have a lot of fun playing with this thing. The Origin is basically, actually I'll talk about the Origin and the Rafa together. The Origin is basically like a lighter version of the Rafa. It has almost an identical balance and like swing weight to static weight ratio, which is different to balance. I know it sounds pretty much the same, but yeah, so it's literally, I've said this a few times now, it's a Origin for dummies, so it's like an Nadal's racket for dummies. So the much more viable option, because when I say dummies, I mean dummies relative to Rafael Nadal, so all of us. You can still be a good player and play with the Rafa. In fact, Beckett plays with the Rafa. He's a dummy, but for different reasons. I would put the Rafa probably in the C tier, and the Origin I'm going to put in the D tier. The Rafa I'm not going to put in the C tier. I think I'm going to put in the B tier because it's pretty fun to play with something like this. Like, this is a very pro balance where there's so much heft in the hoop. You have to almost adapt your swing to be a little bit different, but you also fully understand why Nadal plays the way he does with like that buggy whip motion, why he gets so much spin on the ball, because this balance just produces so much spin. Like, it crushes into the ball so hard, where if you have any tilt to your racket face to generate spin, yeah, you're gonna put a lot of topspin on the ball. It's totally like, obviously it's a spin racket, but it's totally different to the Extreme MP and the Vcore 100. Like, much more top heavy, like a sledgehammer type of thing. So it's fun to play tennis with. I just think you have to be, it's just such a unique racket. I probably wouldn't put most people in this. In fact, I think Beckett is going through this right now, where he's almost realized, like, yes, it's fun to play with, but does it actually complement my best tennis? Like, yes, I can rip the ball sometimes, but when I tighten up and I need to really like grind my way out, is this balance not maybe a little bit too punishing? And I think the answer to that question is generally yes. Like, this is a little bit harder of a racket to play with. And then the Origin is just way too difficult to play with. Don't, buy this racket if you want to remember Nadal fondly. I don't even know if this racket's still around, to be honest. Fun racket to play with for like 3 shots, and then you realize it's gonna break your arm, and you don't have the muscles for it, unfortunately. So yeah, D tier racket there, and B tier racket for the Rafa. I don't know, maybe I'll move it into the C tier, but to be honest, I prefer playing with it compared to any of these rackets here. It's a more fun experience for sure. I just don't know if it's, as usable as these other 3, but more fun. Okay, moving on to the Pure Drive 100. So another racket that came out this year, and there's not a ton to say about the Pure Drive 100. Like, it's either an S or GOAT tier racket. I don't think this Pure Drive is so good that I'm gonna put it in the GOAT tier. Like, it didn't blow me away with like something new. In fact, it was one of the most subtle updates to a Pure Drive, or to like any racket that I've ever seen. The biggest thing is that they just made it feel a little bit softer, like a little bit chalkier, almost is the word I want to use. Like, it does feel a little bit more comfortable than the previous one. But super subtle update, and that's a good thing, because the previous Pure Drive was an excellent racket, as has been pretty much every version of the Pure Drive ever. So an easy S tier racket. I guess I'll quickly talk about what makes a Pure Drive 100 so good. The big thing is it's forgiving and can absolutely destroy the ball. Like, it's not just an easy depth type of power with this thing. It can really rip into it, but you still get an extremely solid and consistent feel. It's not a control racket, but you can control the ball with the Pure Drive. But yeah, just a racket that I think so many players could grab and play extremely good tennis with. Similar to the Speed MP, I think this is an even better racket than the Speed MP. Like, I play better tennis with the Pure Drive 100. In fact, I've considered just buying Pure Drives and saying stop testing test other rackets for reviews and stuff, but stop trying to play with other rackets. Just play with the Pure Drive, figure it out. It's going to be beneficial to you in the long run just because it's so forgiving, powerful, and controlled. But yeah, we'll probably do a longer racket switch saga than just grabbing Pure Drives. But an excellent, excellent racket, and they definitely didn't ruin it with this update. In fact, they barely did anything to it, so just great racket. Okay, so the Clash 100. Now, one of the things that playing with the Ultra 100 did for me in the last couple of weeks was make me think, what is the point of the Clash 100? Now, when it first came out, you know, in 2019, the original Clash, that was totally revolutionary racket because it was so forgiving and super, super comfortable. So, you know, rackets that had been forgiving in the past were like spin rackets, power rackets like the Pure Drive and the Extreme and the Aero, and those were super stiff. So you didn't really have that combination of forgiving and easy on the arm, which the Clash did. But nowadays, you kind of have these Clash adjacent rackets that are stiffer, more powerful, offer you a little bit more feel, a little bit more top end playability, because the big thing with the Clash is it's so mushy, it's so ambiguous, you get so lost in that sweet spot because it's soft and forgiving that it can't really be played at a high level, or at least it has like a cap on its playability. And now that the Ultra is so comfortable, now that the Ezone 100 is so comfortable, now that we're getting rackets like the Blade 100, I just don't see as much of a point in going for something like the Clash 100. So I think I've had it in the S tier just because it was such an important racket for so long. But now you have the option to go for something that's comfortable without needing to make that sacrifice in precision and control and like ball feel, because the Clash basically has no ball feel. The other thing is this racket got an update this year, and it made it maybe a little bit more like the original Clash, where it's like I think the second one was a little bit crisper and sharper, and maybe that wasn't the right way to go with the Clash, because if you are buying this, you want to go like extreme in its clashiness. So maybe that was like technically an improvement on it, but yeah, I just don't feel like this racket is as important as it once was. Now, am I going to take it out of A tier? Yeah, maybe. I mean, yeah, you know what? I think I am going to put this racket in the B tier. I would just personally caution against going for something like the Clash. Like, it does limit you in its playability. If comfort is your main goal, because that was the reason to go for the Clash, if comfort's your main goal, you can fine-tune your playability much more than you could in 2019 when this racket was so revolutionary. Like, if you want comfort with really high power, the Ultra 100 is good. If you want comfort with really high control, the Blade 100 is good. And both these rackets are also very forgiving, like the Clash as well. So I just think you can fine-tune it with other rackets, you know, fine-tune your playability a little bit better with other rackets, whereas the Clash is just that kind of one-size-fits-all comfort, forgiving racket, but it's just not as special as some other rackets on this list. So yeah, I'm gonna put it in the B tier, which is a big drop, but you know, I think I'm happy with that. Okay, now the Percept 100, which that's, you know, it's not a racket that I like at all, and this is an example of these speed clones. Like we got a few speed clones, like Percept 100, Blade 100, T-Fight 300, speed clones. I think they all have 23mm beams, 100 square inch head sizes, 16x19 string patterns. Like, these are really similar, or trying to be speed MPs. I just think if we're comparing the Percept 100 to the Speed MP, like, there is no reason I would ever go for the Percept 100. I think it's slower through the air, which is the biggest criticism I have of the Speed, so that's not a good thing. I think it's less consistent on contact. I think the Percept 100 launches the ball a little bit more. I think it's maybe similar level of spin, I guess. And then the Percept 100 does have a lot of mass in the hoop, so it really can rip the ball. Maybe it is a little bit more powerful than the Speed MP, but you know, it's tougher to swing, so, and swing speed is the best way to get power again. So yeah, I don't know. I would just always go for the Speed MP over the Percept 100. The only reason you might want to go for the Percept 100 is if you want a Speed MP like racket, but you're really used to like that Yonex sweet spot, because the isometric head shape does change the sweet spot a little bit. But I don't think that's an important enough reason to pick the Percept 100 over the Speed MP. I'd probably put the Percept 100 in the C tier. It's also an example of a racket that is really, really good in another head size that gets transformed into a different head size and kind of loses a lot of the benefits, or like the good things of the primary racket, and doesn't gain enough in other domains. You know, kind of like what I was saying about the Pro Staff X, which just isn't really a Pro Staff. The Percept 100 isn't really a Percept to me. So, C tier racket. Okay, the Aero 100. I've consistently put this racket in the S tier, and I really see no reason to put it lower than S tier. I know this hasn't been the most popular Aero 100 ever. I mean, this racket's been out for 3 years, so everybody kind of knows about it. But the big thing is that they tightened up the string pattern and made this a much more, well, they were trying to make it more well-rounded, where like it responds better on flat shots than the last 2 generations of the Aero 100. And personally, I like it so much more than those rackets. The thing is, in a way, they did kind of alienate their clientele who'd gotten used to the way the Aero 100 was like a spin monster for before this Aero 100. They kind of made it a little bit too different from that for some people. But I mean, this is still an extremely spin-friendly racket. If you don't have enough spin here, then go for the Extreme MP, because like I said, that's still got that like more wild side to it. But yeah, I think the Aero 100 is a remarkably consistent, stable, spinny racket and just performs exceptionally well. One little criticism I'd have for it, it's not really criticism, but like obviously the Aero 98 has come out and, you know, taken the tennis world by storm. And some people have said, well, what's the point of going for the Aero 100 now? Because the Aero 98 is quite forgiving. Obviously it's been friendly and it's way more precise, and you know, you can almost hit a bigger ball with it because it's so stable and it is quite powerful. I think the Aero 100 is still much more of like a classic spin player's racket, where like it has that 100 square inch head size, it has like much higher spin modulation than the Aero 98, which is important, I think, in a spin racket. So it is more of a traditional spin racket than the Aero 98. I actually don't think they're like that comparable. So yeah, a fantastic, fantastic racket. Definitely not a GOAT tier Aero 100. I'm super excited for the next Aero 100. Can't really say much about that racket, but I'm excited. Let's just say that. Okay, the Gravity Pro. All right, so this is kind of the reason we got a GOAT tier. You guys know how I feel about this racket. Let's see if I can talk myself into putting it into the GOAT tier, because here's the thing. Here's the thing with the Gravity Pro. The original Gravity Pro, to me, easy GOAT tier. That would, you know, when it first came out, I was just completely blown away by that playability. Like, the Gravity Pro is stable. It's got incredible feel. It's quite powerful. It's decently spin friendly, but like also the most controlled racket on the planet, basically. So, you know, a fantastic design. The thing is, I don't know that it's gotten better over time, because the original one was definitely the most raw Gravity Pro that had the best feel, and then the last generation was a little bit chalkier and more muted, and then this one, I don't know, I don't actually think it's as muted as the previous one, even though it has Auxetic 2.0, which is technically more muted than Auxetic 1.0. But I still think the crown jewel of the three is the original one, in terms of, you know, what the Gravity Pro represents. But the one thing with this racket is that, you know, they changed it this time. They changed the specs a little bit. They brought the balance in closer to the handle and the swing weight down, which makes it easier to use and opens it up to more players. So I think if I were to rank all the Gravity Pros, I'd probably still say original Gravity Pro for the romantic element of it, where it is the best feeling, and it's kind of the first one that came onto the scene and was just like, wow, what a racket. Then it would be this one. And then probably the second one would be last. I mean, they're all excellent. Don't get me wrong. If you have the second Gravity Pro, not a bad racket by any stretch of the imagination. You know what? Just talking about the Gravity Pro makes me so happy. I'm going to put it in the GOAT tier. What a racket this is. Every Gravity Pro is awesome. Can never go wrong with the Gravity. Well, you definitely can go wrong with the Gravity Pro. If you're not a good player, or if you don't have a very, very fast stroke and can handle heavy rackets, because even though they did lower the swing weight, it's still quite a heavy racket, don't get the Gravity Pro. Actually, you know what? We need to have a conversation about that, because I've heard this enough times where people come into the store and say, Luca loves the Gravity Pro, I want to buy one. I need to make this clear. If you're not like a really high level player, you probably shouldn't buy this racket. Like, it's heavy. It's quite difficult to swing. I haven't even switched this racket. I mean, I'm not that good of a player. I'm probably like a high 4.5 on a good day. I haven't switched this racket because it is quite difficult to use, despite liking it as much as I do. So just because I say this is a good racket, I rank it really highly in a bunch of videos and all that, doesn't mean it's a racket for everyone. That being said, if you have the level to swing it, great racket, and there's a reason a lot of pros are using it. Anyways, we'll move on from the Gravity Pro now. Okay, so the Blade 100. Yeah, again, another speed clone. So Percept 100, Blade 100, Speed MP, all comparable enough. See, for me, the Percept 100 is kind of just worse than the Speed MP in almost every domain. The Blade 100 is not as good, but it's also different. Like, it's a little bit more forgiving and user-friendly than the Speed MP. It's a lot quicker through the air because it has quite a low swing weight and a lot of that clash technology where it has a really open, stable, and forgiving sweet spot. So it's a more forgiving racket than the Speed MP, a little bit easier to use. I would say way less big hitting potential than the Speed MP, less spin, less power. Control is very, very similar. I'd say the Speed MP, again, feels a little bit more solid and stable. The Blade feels a little bit more like a traditional control racket where it soaks the ball in a little bit more, but I still don't think it's a racket that's on the same level, even once it's customized. Just doesn't have quite as much magic, and I think you definitely need some magic to be in the S tier. Do I want to put in the A tier? Yeah, I'd probably put the Blade 100 in the A tier. Like, I think it's closer to the Speed MP than it is the Percept 100. It's actually a good thing that the Ultra 100 and the Blade 100 are on the same tier, because it's kind of like, if you want a controlled clash, go for the Blade 100. If you want a power clash, go for the Ultra 100. Both the Blade and the Ultra are super comfortable, very forgiving rackets, and they just, like I was saying, you're able to fine-tune your playability a little bit more than if you go for the Clash. So yeah, a really, really good racket, the Blade 100. I really enjoyed hitting with it. I think I'm just maybe lacking a little bit of top-end something with it, but it's a really, really good racket. Okay, the T-Fight 300. You know, another example of if you're gonna be trying to make a speed-like racket, you just need something to be a little bit different from the Speed. And the T-Fight has a feel element to it. Like the T-Fight, every current T-Fight is foam filled and has just this really wonderful kind of pop on contact. So the feel is really good here. Now, I don't think this racket is as good as the Speed, I'll say it again. I'm gonna put it on the same level as the Blade 100, just because I think if you do want similar playability, you know, that really well-rounded 300 gram 16x19 racket, it's a good one to go with if you want a little bit more feel. This also has more power, more spin than the Blade 100. But again, just not quite as much of that magical element that the Speed MP has. So A-tier racket for me. Okay, Speed Pro. You know, saying a lot of good things right now about the Speed line, but I just don't think that translates to the Speed Pro in quite the same way. The big thing being the Speed Pro is just a hunk of a racket to swing. Like, it is so heavy. There's just so much mass in that hoop because it is a 100. It has a 23mm beam and a very, very, very high swing weight. So a super hard racket to swing. Obviously, it has that 18x20 string pattern, so it's a little bit more consistent and controlled. Like, it's super stable. There's no denying that. So if you want a control racket that's also much more powerful and a little bit more spin friendly than traditional control rackets like the Gravity Pro, or I mean, we don't have a ton of traditional control rackets on here because it's a 100 square inch list. Here's the thing, if you're super strong, then maybe you're just gonna have a more consistent Speed MP. I just never get to that level here. I have to swing these rackets so differently because I just don't have the swing speed required and the muscles required to swing the Speed Pro the way I would a Speed MP. So I can't benefit from it in that way. So yeah, I think for me, it's just a B tier racket. I also, like, if you are that level of player, I don't know that you necessarily need the extra power that the Speed Pro gives you. Like, the reason you go for an 1820 is to get like a super consistent feel out of it. And I don't think you need that extra power at that level. Like, to me, the Gravity Pro is just a better take on a 100 square inch 1820, I guess. And of course, the Legend Pro is just a Speed Pro. Okay, the Ezone 100. Yeah, I was such a big fan of the previous Ezone 100. I thought that one was like, it was on the same level of the Pure Drive because it wasn't maybe quite as powerful, didn't have quite as like a responsive, stable feel, but it had more spin. So it was like, if you want that power racket and you're a more spin-coated player, go for the Ezone, and you're a little bit more flat and like you want a little bit more of a consistent string bed, go for the Pure Drive. There's like a perfect dichotomy between the two. This Ezone, they made it a little bit mushier, a little bit more forgiving. They also opened up the top of the hoop, which like every brand is doing right now. And I think it made it a little bit more launchy. It sprays the ball around a little bit more. It's not quite as consistent. Moral of the story is I don't feel as confident with this racket as I did with the previous Ezone 100. Now, I've come around to that on the Ezone 98. I actually think, you know, making it a little bit more forgiving, mushing it up, opening up the sweet spot, all that works quite well on the Ezone 98 once I wrap my head around it. I don't think it works as well on the Ezone 100 because you got to keep in mind, Yonex rackets already feel like half a square inch bigger than they play, or sorry, half a square inch bigger than they are because of the isometric head shape. Making it feel even bigger than that, it's made it feel less pro to me. So I'm actually gonna drop it down a tier from where I had it. I think on the previous one, I must have had it in the S tier because I was a huge fan of that racket. I'm gonna put it in the A tier. Like, it's still a very, very good racket, don't get me wrong. I wish it was a little bit more solid. It is more comfortable though, so that's a big thing. If you found the previous Ezone 100 uncomfortable, which I personally didn't, I was surprised that a lot of people did, to be honest. But if you found that one uncomfortable, this one is definitely much more comfortable. So that's I guess an improvement if you want to look at it that way. Okay, the Clash 100 Pro. I just don't get the point of this racket anymore. I mean, you know, I've relegated the Clash 100 a couple tiers here. I'm gonna just put the Clash 100 Pro in the D tier. I don't understand why it's thicker. Like, that doesn't make much sense to me. I guess it makes it more powerful, but it's just a weird racket to me. I don't know, maybe you guys really like the Clash 100 Pro. If you do, if that's you, please explain to me what the point of this racket is, because yeah, a heavy Clash just doesn't make too much sense. And this is a super sluggish racket because it's so thick and, like, what is it, 310 grams, 315 grams? I guess it's comfortable, but so is the Clash 100. Oh, and the Shift 99 Pro. Damn, we're finishing with some rackets that I don't consider to be all that great. I mean, okay, the Shift 99 Pro is much better than the Clash 100 Pro. And I think I might have been a little bit harsh with it in the previous tier list. I think I did have it in the lowest tier last year. Oh, nice, I've lost my ability to put images there. I think I did have it in the D tier. I'm not gonna put it in the D tier. Maybe not even in the C tier, maybe I will put in the B tier. The thing about the Shift 99 Pro is it's just kind of weird because it feels like the Shift 99 in that it's like, wow, there's so much more spin here than I was expecting. But it's just weird because the string bed is so tight, like it makes you want to play a flat style, but then you're like, well, I can spin the ball. I guess that means it has good variety, but it does feel like it's kind of in this weird limbo between being a control racket and a spin racket. Yeah, I guess kind of similar to the Speed Pro and the Speed MP. The concept of the racket makes more sense in a lighter, more open string bed than it does in the heavier, denser string bed take on it. So not a bad racket by any stretch of the imagination, but I do think it's way too niche to be like in a high tier list. Go for this racket if you play with a lot of spin but want a dense string bed. I'm not sure who that is, but you know, if that's you, perfect. You got your racket. All right. Anyways, that is going to be the end of this tier list. I'm also looking at this and it's almost perfectly balanced. If you take the GOAT tier out and you just look at it, like, it's almost perfectly balanced. I promise I didn't, you know, I wasn't thinking of that beforehand. I wasn't trying to make this thing like a perfect, I don't know, what do you call that? Curve. Bell curve. Bell curve. But yeah, lots of good 199 square inch rackets. I feel like this video is gonna be another 45 minute video. It's gonna be brutal to edit, but you know what? Yeah, with that said, that is going to be the end of the video. Thank you so much for watching. And remember, if you wanna check out any of these rackets, you can come visit us in store, or if you wanna buy them, you can go online at racketsandrunners.ca.